Okay, so to wrap up George Clayton Johnson and the Twilight Zone, the last two to discuss are A Penny for Your Thoughts and also 90 Years Without Slumbering. And both of those have very interesting stories behind them. Now, A Penny for Your Thoughts, everybody, like Kick the Can and a game of pool, everybody remembers A Penny for Your Thoughts too. Or more than the average, or more than you might expect. And here we had a story that was a little bit more complicated. So now we're dealing with telepathy. Now telepathy was covered a number of times on Twilight Zone, a good 5 or 6 times. But this was one that really worked, in George Clayton Johnson's style. It had that Johnsonian sort of hue to it that made it work wonderfully well. And James Sheldon directed it, and George happened to be on the set for the shoot of that, or most of it. And usually, I will tell you, having known enough writers who worked in showbiz, I'm not a television writer, but having known enough of them, and enough of them who sold stories, usually the writers are not allowed on set. After the script has been, bought by either bought by the production company or written, as part of a staff, if the show has a staff of writers, or if it's bought from a freelancer, just kind of on spec or whatever. After it's been bought, the writer is told nicely to go away, that thank you very much with all our hearts for your wonderful story, but now we're going to take it over and remodel it and make tweaks and changes, and you've been paid off, so go away. Now, Twilight Zone I don't think was that really kind of a show, because for one thing, Rod wrote most of things, and not that the writers were around for the shooting, but if they did happen to be, then it was within limits. Whereas starting in about the 70s, I think it very much became off limits, from what I've heard from those who have discussed that with me, at least based on other shows. Of course, Twilight Zone was a different kind of show. I mean, it was just so different from the mainstream, and everybody knew how good it was, and everybody wanted a part on it. Everybody wanted to write for it, but there was only so much to go around. So George was on the set for the shooting, and always, of course, had these fond memories of it, and starring were Dick York and Dan Tobin playing his boss. Dick York is Hector B. Poole, Poole, and Dan Tobin playing his boss, Mr. Bagby. And Cyril Delavanti is the little old man who still he's elderly, but he still works in the bank, Mr. Smithers, who Poole thinks is going to be robbing the bank, judging on what he's able to telepathically ascertain. And then June Dayton plays the pretty young secretary, and her name will come back to the character she plays will come back to me. I'll remember momentarily, but I haven't watched it. I haven't watched that in a number of years. So, as I say, I'm not a Twilight Zone geek. I'm really not. And then none other than Hayden Rourke, the great Hayden Rourke, who everybody knows as Dr. Bellows from I Dream of Jeannie, makes an appearance as Mr. Sykes, who's planning to use the money that he borrows from the bank to go bet on the horses, which apparently is very much, at least it was against the law in those days. And in today's day and age, they don't care what you do with the money, as long as you have the credit and you pay it back with interest. They don't care what you do with it. So anyway, that was, when you see that, that's kind of a funny thing. But a very small part there for Hayden Rourke, but done quite well. So what causes this telepathy? Well, we see this, at the beginning, where this guy Hector B. Poole, for some reason, gets this telepathic ability, and it comes from this coin that gets tossed into a newspaper guy's coin box, like a old-fashioned glass coin box. And it lands on its edge, and for some reason that causes the telepathy. And then he momentarily, he gets hit, or like, what do you call this, like grazed by a car. A car knocks him over, and then, but that isn't what causes the telepathy, apparently. It's this coin. It's a very clever idea, a coin that kind of lands on its edge. And when does a coin ever land on its edge? Okay, so that starts the whole thing. A very, very good idea. So, he goes on and has all this, these telepathic things that go on during the course of one day. That was always kind of a good plot device, or not device, but way to write a story, of having the thing take place over a short period of time, like an afternoon or like one day or something like that. So we see Hector B. Poole, bumbling, his way through the day with this telepathic ability, and then he gets in trouble with it. And he's predicted that this employer, played by his employer fires him after he tells him that this coworker is planning to rob the bank and go take the money and go to, Fiji or someplace like that. And ultimately, he doesn't. But they're going to try to get him as he walks out the door with his briefcase. They were expecting to find this briefcase full of money, and they empty it out. And they don't find anything except a sandwich and a pair of socks and, whatever else. So, anyhow, that we see kind of at the very end, he gets rehired, and it's like, well, yeah, okay, you fired me, but now if you rehire me, I don't want my old job back. I want something more because you messed up. So he gets a better position out of it, and then we see him in the last shot going off with Dick York and June Dayton going off with, not into the sunset, but down to the subway or something. So they're both single, and maybe now they can kind of get something going romantically. So, kind of quiet, unobtrusive episode that surprisingly a lot of people remember. Now, George's last story. He did not write anything from season 4, and he didn't write anything really for season 5 either, but they bought this story from him called Tick of Time. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a copy of George's book, Twilight Zone Scripts and Stories. I have it, but it's buried somewhere, and I can't find it. Otherwise, I would have it here. But George's stories and scripts, the stories for 4 and the scripts for 4, were all published in this volume. And he used to give copies of this book away for free to people, just because of the kind of person he was. So, Tick of Time, not Nick of Time. Tick of Time, which became 90 Years Without Slumbering, was bought by the company, by Twilight Zone, but it was remodeled and revamped and changed to such an extent that George didn't even want his name on it. And for some reason, they put in the credits that it was based on a story by somebody named Johnson Smith. Now, what kind of a name is Johnson Smith? As some people know, Twilight Zone really kind of fell through the cracks, as far as production in its final months, because there were things like that kind of went on, and there were problems with certain episodes in the 5th season. The short drink from a certain fountain, and sounds and silences, and few other ones that they faced trouble with, I think, and ones that were pulled from the production lineup, and those two that I mentioned, sounds and silences, and a short drink from a certain fountain, did not go into syndication, and because of legal problems, and they really weren't seen again for another 2 decades, literally, or more than 2 decades. So anyway, they bought this story from George, and they brought in Ed Wynn and also Carolyn Kearney to star in it. Now, Carolyn Kearney was a very nice lady, and she worked in television with, all the great ones, but only for really about a 10 to 15 year bracket, and then she stopped forever. And she raised a family, and she, like many actresses of that day especially, she put her family ahead of her career, and she trained extensively and studied acting, trained at the Pasadena Playhouse, and worked with all these people, including President Reagan, when he was still an actor. And then she abruptly stopped in the mid-60s and went about her life. And thankfully, I met her, and she came to our second Twilight Zone convention and gave us a wonderful interview for the DVDs, which is out there worldwide on the definitive edition DVDs. And then, unfortunately, she passed away. So really, we got to her in the nick of time, thanks to a friend of hers who said, yeah, I didn't know how to reach Carolyn Kearney. But anyway, I remember Carolyn and George were there that day, that they both shot their interviews at the soundstage for the DVDs. And he gave her a copy of his book with this, Tick of Time story in it. So anyway, the episode really just doesn't bear much resemblance of to anything that George wrote. Not much, but needless to say, the story, as everybody knows it, is about a grandfather's clock that's been around for many, many years, like 76 years or however old Ed Wynn is in this episode. And he's convinced that it's going to run down, and as soon as it strikes its last beat, that's also going to mean the last striking of a beat of his heart. And then he's going to die. Well, so all throughout, he's obsessed with this clock, and then finally at the very, very end, he gives in and said, no, that clock hasn't kept good time for years, and, who cares? I'm just going to finally let it go. So, not a tremendously good episode, but that does it for George's contributions and to the show as a writer. And as I say, he really knew he really understood things better than just about anybody as far as all things Twilight Zone. He understood. He said, I loved the show. He said, I watched it religiously because I was such a fan of what, the kind of thing that Rod was doing. And even more proud to have been a part of it as a writer. And I remember at the 2006, the first convention of two conventions that was done in New Jersey. After we did our two in LA, then two more were done in New Jersey. And George was there. There was a dinner on Saturday night, which started, and basically towards the end of this dinner, everybody who was sitting, we were all sitting at round tables, and everybody who was sitting at George's table, it was like he started this philosophical discussion, as he always used to do, and then it carried down into the bar on the first floor of the hotel. It started at like 6:30 p.m. with the dinner, and then, it carried down, and they continued it down in the bar. And I remember I was down in the lobby at about midnight because I needed quarters for the Coke machine was not accepting credit cards. Nowadays, you can swipe your card and hit the button, and you swipe your credit card and get it and pay for your beverage from the machine that way. Well, the credit card thing wasn't working, and I didn't have any quarters. So I took my dollar bills downstairs to get them from the front desk, and here's George holding court still with all these people in the bar at 1 in the morning, or whenever that was. It was very, very late at night, or early the next morning. So before that afternoon, we did a panel discussion, as we always did at the conventions. And I led this panel, and it was very impromptu. It wasn't announced or anything, but everybody who was at the convention pretty much came. The room was full of people, which made me a little nervous because I don't like talking in public that much. I can do it. I have skills as a public speaker, and I've done public speaking, so I knew how to do this thing. But I was hoping I just need to let the rest of the actors and George talk. So I was sitting there on this set-up table that was put there along with 3 or 4 actors who were there: Mary Badham and Noah Keane and Jacqueline Scott and Lois Nettleton. I think a couple others wandered in too. There were about 15 actors there that weekend, plus George. And of course, when it came time for George to talk, I don't think he really had much, but somebody asked him a question. He said, I'll open it up. He said, I could talk all day about Twilight Zone, but I'll open it up for questions. And somebody asked him a question or whatever, and that started him talking. Now, what happened was, he did what he always used to do, and he veered off onto a tangent. Now, not an uninteresting tangent, but he started getting off onto God and prayers, and he said, let's think about this, his old philosophical sort of way. He said, let's think about what could happen if suddenly everybody in this room, starting with one person, could read everybody else's mind. He said, and what if what if prayers were real? What if you could pray to God and the prayers would be answered? Well, at this point, I'm like, oh my God, please, George, don't go down this road. Don't open that door, please. And I was so worried that somebody was going to object to this and get up and start shouting or something. Nobody did. But he said, what if prayers were real? What if you could, pray and something, the prayer was like answered? Well, I'm not religious, but a lot of people would take offense to that, but I never heard anything about it afterwards, about, that George Clayton Johnson, the atheist, horrible. No, I didn't hear anything about that afterwards. No. But I was thinking, this is the kind of thing though that he would do. But still, it has, metaphysical. The whole, whole metaphysical thing. Is something. It divide. When you pray to whatever God that you pray to, you're doing calling upon divine intervention. And George never said he didn't agree with it or didn't subscribe to that himself, but it's like you can't bring those things into public, especially if you're as well-known a figure as he was. Certainly older and past his prime by then, but still, this is not the place to be getting into religion or God and prayer. So I was just sitting there bracing, of course, not like this, but I was like, on my suit and everything, or my formal attire and my tie and everything, and I'm just thinking to myself, oh God, please don't let anything come of this. So, George was George, the unmistakable guy with the long white hair and the parka, the blue and the royal blue and yellow inner lining parka with his Rod Serling Memorial Foundation button here in his left hand corner, and everybody loved the guy. Easy guy to love, tough guy to hate. And I will also remember that the week before that Twilight Zone convention, I had invited him, and he came and spoke on another panel at the Book Publicists of Southern California Writers Group. And we met every 2 months at the Sportsman's Lodge, and this organization still exists. And I invited him to come, and he came, and he knocked everybody's socks off. He talked then, just as those of you who've seen the video, he talked at the Twilight Zone convention, gave the keynote address in 2002 at our first Twilight Zone convention. He did the same thing at that dinner 4 years later in 2006, and it was spectacular. And what he was talking about then, he always chose a theme to talk about. He'd ramble, but he always had a theme. It was always going somewhere. And for that discussion, it was about Hollywood, because the theme of that, there were other speakers, not just him. But he hogged the spotlight in the best way possible. Everybody was, so glad that he was there. But he was talking about Hollywood, and he said, what the problem is? It all boils down to one thing, as to why Hollywood is so corrupt nowadays. And he said, you know what it is? It's that they don't know what the hell they want. And at that point, I think everybody just started applauding. He said, it's obvious, isn't it? It's like the most plain and obvious sort of thing in the world. They were applauding and laughing and clapping, and it was like, you hit it on the head. And half the people in this room didn't even know who he was, I would dare say, or more. But here's George, the wizard who knows 50 times as much as these other agents and other people who they'd invited to come and talk that evening about turning a book into a Hollywood screenplay. That was really the topic of that other panel. And he said, they don't know what they want, and that's the problem. They think they want this, they think they want that. They try this, they try that, they try the next thing, they try yet other things. And sometimes it works, but most of the time it does not. And I think that's why he left showbiz at an early age of about 45 with Logan's Run, co-authored with William F. Nolan. I could talk a lot about William F. Nolan, too, and the other things they wrote together, including a Twilight Zone script. But I don't have time to do that. So this is my three-part tribute to George Clayton Johnson, who was such an integral part of Twilight Zone and knew it better than anybody else. And as I say, I have no doubt that Rod Serling would absolutely agree with it and give him that credit. So thank you.